Fred Richani of the TSC podcast. We have a very special guest. He is a pro football legend, a college football legend. He is a member of the 1980s 49ers Dynasty with Joe Montana and Bill Walsh, a Pro Bowler himself, All-Pro. We are talking to legendary offensive lineman Randy Cross. Randy, how's it going?
It's doing fantastic. It's a perfect time of the year. We're just winding down football, and that's usually when the best games happen.
For sure. And I should also note, too, you're not just a college football legend. You're a college football Hall of Famer. Man, what do you think about the college game these days?
It's pretty amazing, and there's no coincidence now that the NFL's finally kind of woken up to the fact that if you're going to spend all that money, I mean, millions and millions of dollars on college players, maybe offensively, if you had them do the same thing in the pros, they might be better at it. and you're seeing teams actually do that with especially quarterbacks, and it's paid off. I mean, sure, you're going to eventually train. You're going to eventually learn to be an NFL quarterback, but that definition of an NFL quarterback used to be, 6'5", had the scrambling ability of a chest of drawers, and could throw the ball forever. Well, that's changed dramatically, and I think it's for the better.
It seems like it's definitely for the better, especially for the fans. But conversely, do you also think that doesn't give some of the quarterbacks of the past enough credit? Because if you look at these gaudy numbers, and nothing against Drew Brees and Tom Brady and Peyton Manning, all first ballot Hall of Famers, some current great players like Pat Mahomes. We look at their numbers, and they're great. And then you look at, say, like Joe Montana, who you played with, who's one of the all-time greats, and some people may say, oh, well, his numbers are kind of pedestrian, or Troy Aikman's were kind of pedestrian. But it was a hell of a lot harder to play quarterback back then. So do you think that kind of gets lost in history?
Yeah, I think so. You mean back when they could actually hit a quarterback?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a little harder back then. It's kind of like bell bottoms. Eventually they're going to come back in style, and running the ball and being physical for a while seemed to be something that, wasn't the way you really did it. That was sort of early man football. Well, the caveman is back, and the better teams in the league are the teams that are the physical ones, that do run the ball well, that do play good defense, and there is nothing breaking news or cutting edge about that style. And it's fun to watch. I think it really is. And especially when you've got teams that have the ability to do a little bit of both. That even makes it even better when you look at some of the innovative things a guy like Shanahan's doing on the offensive side for the Niners.
It's funny because I've interviewed a lot of legendary players, and more often than not, they usually get pretty ticked off that you can no longer really hit the quarterback, and they've kind of legislated defense. You seem to be on the other side of the spectrum. So for you, was it something that took you time to get used to, or was this something that you were like, man, this is long overdue?
Well, yeah, maybe it's because I've been around the game, for TV and stuff for the last 30-something years. So the change and the adjustments come a lot more gradual than if you're kind of detached from it, which a lot of guys are. I found, the way the game is now, yeah, it's not as physical. Yeah, there's things that get flags thrown for it now that you watch it and you go, damn, they're just playing football. But that's safety. And that's overall the way they've changed the game. That tells you a little bit about what the game was like, back in the 80s and 90s and, 15, 20 years ago, when it was still pretty much, no holds barred, full contact karate.
And you're somebody, if I understand this correctly, you've pledged to donate your brain, right, for research after you pass away?
Yeah, I did. And that is to see, exactly. They need more than just, brains that have been addled or affected. They need brains that maybe haven't been, and to see what the difference is and see why. Because the capricious nature of this whole thing, things like CTE and Alzheimer's and all these other afflictions that have been hitting not only Americans in general, especially older Americans, but more specifically those that have been hit in the head a lot, whether they be military or football or soccer or rugby or whatever. They need those brains. And, hell, I won't need it after I'm gone. I told them they can't have it till I'm done. But, I think it's a great deal because these guys that are playing now, and I think a guy like Luke Kuechly is a good example. He's had concussion issues. He's had injury issues. He's 29, and he's calling off the jam. I mean, that never happened before. And I think a lot of that speaks to These guys are very aware of the dangers. These guys are making informed decisions. And that's what really contrasts with guys that have played, it sounds a long time ago, but guys that played in the last century, guys that played especially 70s, 80s, 90s, and the guys that are playing now. These guys know what's going on. They're looked after specifically with that in mind. Can't say that for the older generation of players.
So you think we're going to be moving into a trend where more guys are going to be retiring 30 and under?
Well, I think it doesn't take a mathematics whiz or an economist to look at it and say, well, maybe the money's got something to do with it. These guys play 7-8 years. That's 2 full contracts. And the size of some of these contracts, especially these guys that are drafted early, guys like Kuechly, guys like Andrew Luck, you play 8-9 years and you're right around that magic 30 number. You've made tens and dozens of millions of dollars. And even after taxes and after everything, you should have a huge nest egg. And that's things, guys look at that and they say, how much more of this do I want to take? They may be married. They may be getting married. They may have just had kids. They may already have kids. But they're taking all those things into consideration. And I think the money's got a huge deal to do with it because, frankly, if you can play 8 years and in some cases make, $75 to $100 million in those 8 years, and after that, do you want to keep beating the crap out of yourself? I don't think so.
Yeah, well said. Now, you're somebody that played for a long time entirely with the 49ers on the offensive line. A very integral position, but also a thankless position. You eventually transitioned into broadcasting, but I'm sure initially when you had to hang up the cleats, it was tough, and it's tough for any player after a while to retire from athletics because unlike a real regular job or whatnot, you're not retiring at age 60 or 65. You're retiring in your 30s. Maybe if you're lucky, or around 40. So how did you come to grips with life after the NFL and get back on your feet?
Well, I was actually, in a situation where I had a business going on the side that was doing very, very well at that time and did do very well for 2-3 years after I retired. So that sort of cushioned that whole slack between playing and not playing. Plus I got, I was so busy, I didn't have any time to miss football. I was working 6 or 7 days a week during football season and about 5 or 6 days during the non-football season, traveling a lot. So I was what you might call active when I first retired. And I didn't really even think about, playing and what not being on that team meant until I covered the 1989 playoffs in January of 1990. For the NFL Today with CBS, and I was on the sideline for the pregame show, and I'm watching these guys warm up at Candlestick, and I looked and I went, God dang it, they're going to do it again. But that's about the only twinge I got.
When you transitioned to broadcasting, was there anything that you didn't expect? Because it is a little bit different from being on the football field. Obviously far less physical, but like any job title, it always has its challenges.
Oh yeah. It's exponentially more difficult than players think it is. Because every player thinks they can just go do it. And it's thinking, how hard can it be? Well, it's hard as hell. And unfortunately for a lot of guys, they never really quite figure out until they get into it, the amount of work that it takes. And on top of that, it's a form of entertainment. So, you can either do it or you can't do it. And if you can't do it, you can learn to do it adequately. But you got to have that sort of natural flair to be able to do it and be successful. Because once you work at it hard enough, you can develop skills to be a pretty good communicator. But, it's tough on guys because it's very, very public. You're out there, especially nowadays. I mean, I started in 1989. I don't even know if I can't even remember using the internet in 1989. But, as my career has gone on, something like social media, which, was birthed in the last 15 years or so, that really has exploded what it's like doing what players all want to do and what I've done since '89. And, you can't get too caught up in the fact that if you're lucky, half the people out there are going to like what you do. If you're 50-50 and half of them like you and half of you hate you, you're highly successful.
Yeah, I mean, there's an old saying that I got from one of my mentors in broadcasting. There are always going to be people that don't like you, and you just got to deal with it.
Yep. Just something because it's completely out of your control. And that's one thing that you learn in sports, especially football. You can't worry about things not in your control. But this is really not in your control. In football, it's injuries, it's luck, it's various things that happen that you look at and you go, God, why can that go differently? But in this, it's one TV executive, their favorite ice cream might be strawberry, and you're big with that guy. 3 years later, somebody else gets his job, and his favorite ice cream is pistachio, and he can't stand strawberry. So strawberry doesn't work too much after that, and pistachio gets all the jobs. But that's just sort of the nature of the beast.
As you said, with broadcasting, part of it's being a communicator. And you also have to be a communicator when you're an offensive lineman. And I think it's the most thankless position in all of football because they're not just the guys that protect the quarterback and the running back and everybody else, but they're usually the smartest guys on the field itself. Can you talk about how you had to kind of communicate and like the challenges that you faced day in and day out as a lineman that maybe some people don't see on TV?
Well, it is how quickly things have to happen, and it's developing. There's not many other, definitely not many other sports, but many other things you do. I've heard analogies from guys that are in the military that, at times in tough situations, you can't communicate. You just can't. You are not going to be able to talk it through. You have to kind of trust, and you have to kind of know what the other people are going to do. And on the offensive line, it's very much like that. And when you put new people in any spot, it disrupts that. And the successful teams and the successful coaches are the ones that can, when they have those changes, minimize the problems. There's been several great offensive line coaches, in the NFL over the last 20, 30 years. And that's the one thing they really kind of have in common. Everyone could develop really good players. The talented guys, you can teach them to be great. The guys that are just kind of okay and are going to be your fill-ins, that's where the really good coaches, I think, make their money. That make that whole thing, because it's one thing to be able to speak from guy to guy. Well, how many road stadiums can you play in these days where you can talk to the guy next to you? And I'll answer my own question. Not many.
Yeah.
It's a very low number. So, you've got to have that confidence that you know what you're doing and you assume he's going to be doing the exact same thing. And when it's working right, it's beautiful. And when it's not a fun day.
Especially for the quarterback, right?
Yeah, exactly. Quarterback or running backs. But somebody's getting hit.
That's for sure. Now, in your career, you played center and you played guard. What did you prefer playing?
Probably guard. I always explained it that, when you play center and you're in the scrum so much and you're kind of in the jumble, people know you're there, but they can't always see you. And the way we played guard with the Niners under Bill Walsh is we did a lot of running, a lot of pulling, a lot of traps, a lot of bims, a lot of powers, a lot of two-guard sweeps, and a lot of quick tosses where the guard pulled out in front of the running back. So when you were a guard, they saw you. They knew you were there, and they knew exactly what you were doing. So I kind of enjoyed that. I played 13 years. I played 9.5 at guard, and I played 3.5 at center. And at the end of my career, our regular center in '87, Fred Quillen blew his knee out. So they moved me back to center. And I played center from the middle of '87 through the Super Bowl the next year. And then when I got done playing football, I made a series of Miller Lite commercials. And when we were doing that commercial, I was looking over the guy's shoulder, and I looked at the screen, and it said Randy Cross, All-Pro Center. And I looked at the director, and I said, "Hey, not for nothing. I know this is kind of Hollywood and Tinseltown." I said, "But I was never an All-Pro Center. I was like an All NFC maybe, but I was never an All-Pro Center." And he looks over at the advertising agency guy. He goes, "Is that true?" And he says, "Well, I guess if he says so, it's true." And the director kind of pauses, and he goes, "Okay, look, were you All-Pro?" I said, "Yeah, I was All-Pro several times." He says, "Okay, did you play center?" I said, "Yeah, I played center for 3.5 years." He goes, "Good, there you go. You're an All-Pro, you're a center. Voila." So since I retired, most people assume that's all I ever played.
But let it be known you were a center and a guard, and you prefer to play guard.
Absolutely.
Roger Craig, not in the Hall of Fame, which I find kind of preposterous. What do you think?
I don't think much of it. I gave up a long time ago trying to figure out what the criteria, what the bar was for that particular recognition. It is the most exclusive fraternity in sports. It's there's not many of them out there, and that's the reason. And it's closely coveted and guarded. But I don't know. I couldn't even tell you who votes on it anymore. I used to know who was voting on it, and back then I could be more specific. But
do you think your dog would cast better votes than some of these guys these days?
I don't think there's any doubt that my wife's rat barking in the background would be, he'd actually be a more informed voter.
Now, you had an incredible career at UCLA, College Football Hall of Fame, drafted by the Niners, played your entire career with the 49ers, 76 to 89, which is kind of unheard of these days in the NFL. Yes, there are some guys that do spend their whole career with teams like Joe Thomas for the most part, but these days I feel like a majority of the NFL is kind of shifting to the NBA model and MLB model, where guys are going to go in the best situations, the best deals. They're not necessarily going to stick it out. What does it mean for you? Well, you're not in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. You did have an incredible career, all with one team, laid that winning foundation. What does it mean to you to be a true 49ers legend with that one team your whole career?
I think it's fantastic. The Niners have a thing called the 10-year club, and it's all the guys that played at least 10 years. And there's a lot fewer guys than you would think that actually, are in that group. And there's a wall in this facility, I believe, where all the pictures are on the wall of the guys that played at least 10 years. And with all the success over, the the 80s and the 90s, there were several guys that are from those teams. But, you look at it now, and part of it, again, we talked about the guys retiring early because they've got the money saved. I think a lot of players have the opposite thinking. They're going to keep taking those checks as long as they can. They are not going to play those extra 2-3 years. And that was one thing I really credit Bill Walsh for, is he'd sit us down at the end of every season and he'd look at you and he'd go, okay, let's say, he'd say, Randy, you're one of the best there's been at what you're doing. He goes, you've got 4 more years here, and you could probably go somewhere else and play a couple more. But if you were into planning, you better plan on being here about another 3 or 4 years. And he did that to every guy. And that was just the way he looked at it, because his philosophy was he didn't want guys playing out the string. He'd let them go do that somewhere else. And if you look at many of the guys that played in San Francisco, they had some significant, great careers there, but their end of their careers ended with other teams.
That is true, and it's great to be a part of a team where you literally set the foundation, but your first few years were extremely rough there. When you go from missing the playoffs your first couple of seasons to all of a sudden a Super Bowl, I mean, can you describe that feeling? I mean, it's amazing that you win a Super Bowl, but I'm sure when you're having those losing seasons, when you're missing the playoffs, when you're in the doldrums, is it kind of hard to see what's on the horizon?
Oh yeah, it's real hard. I mean, my rookie year we were 8-6. My first 2 years we still played 14 regular season games. So my first year we were 8-6 and almost made the playoffs. My second year we were 5-9. We changed coaches after the first year. We changed coaches after the second year. My third coach started my third year, and we were 2-14. So halfway through that season, the first coach got fired, and they named the running back coach the head coach, and he was the coach for the next 7 games. So I'd already had 3 years and 4 head coaches. So Bill Walsh going into my 4th year was my 5th head coach. And then we promptly went 2-14 again, and then 6-10, and then starting in '81 is when, things turned around significantly for the next about 20 years for the Niners.
Yeah, and that takes incredible patience that I don't think you see as much these days in sports, and particularly with football and everything. And even Coach Shanahan right now with the Niners, they've had great success this past season. First couple years, rough. You can blame injuries, you can blame whatever the case may be. And a lot of coaches in that position would have been done. They would have said, okay, you know what? You had 2 years. Get the hell out of here. Why do you think that some franchises exercise more patience than others and are able to kind of see that, see the horizon?
Well, the smart thing the Niners did this last time is they brought in John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan at the same time and gave them both matching 6-year contracts. That's pretty good solidarity as a coach and a GM, because you're going to get some time to do what you need to do. And, that was fantastic. I think in general, when you're talking about players surviving bad teams, that's more survival instinct than anything else. And, coaches survive on the whims of the owner and the people in charge at many times, because that, public opinion isn't very much different than, an owner's opinion, only the owner's got a hell of a lot more money. It still changes a lot and vacillates a lot. So, it's a rough thing to go through. And some people consider, 7-9 a huge embarrassment. By the time we were winning Super Bowls, any year we didn't win a Super Bowl was considered a huge embarrassment. So, your expectations definitely get ratcheted up the more you win.
I know you were ready to retire in '89, but when you retired and then saw them win another Super Bowl, were you like, damn, I could have waited one more year?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I was in New Orleans. Patrice and I, my wife, we went down there to see the game. And actually, Hank Stram came down with laryngitis, so I ended up calling the second half with Jack Buck on national radio. So I had an up close and personal front row seat for that whole thing happening. So yeah, I thought about it. We did a little quick interview with, I think, Roger Craig after the game, and on the way out, after he's finishing the interview, the last thing he said goes, "RC, you should still be here." I was like, "Yeah, I know."
Hey, you got a front row seat in another way. Was there anything that kind of surprised you watching your Niners, the team that you played with for so many years, like from the broadcasting perspective? Like, obviously, you know how great Joe Montana and the greatness of Bill Walsh and all these guys firsthand, up close and personal. But when you're watching from afar, when you got to take a step back from the game and then got to watch them do their thing as an observer, was there anything that really popped out at you?
Lots of things. That was one of the fun educational things for me was, when you're a broadcaster, you're going to all these facilities. You're talking to the coaches, you're talking to the owners, you're talking to the front office people. You get to really see how a team works and what their personality is and, whatnot. I assumed wrongly, that everyone did business like the way we did things in San Francisco. Everybody practiced the same way. Everyone was treated the same way. And when I got into TV and started seeing all these other facilities and all these other teams and how other teams were treated, man, did I start appreciating Eddie DeBartolo and Bill Walsh and John McVay and, all the people that were running the team I played for, because they had an unfair advantage because that team was run and treated people so much differently than 90% of the other teams out there. At that time, it was a very stark contrast.
We actually have some quick hits here. We like to kind of fire off some random questions, football related, life related, just to get to know you a little bit more. Is that cool?
Sounds good with me.
All right, here's some quick hits. Favorite cheat meal?
Cheat meal?
Yeah, favorite meal you're not supposed to eat but eat anyway.
Okay. Let's see. It probably involves outdoor cooking. I would say barbecued pork. Pork bellies, to be more specific.
Besides Jerry Rice and Joe Montana, who's the most talented teammate you played with?
Ronnie Lott.
For any younger fans that may not know, what made him stand out?
Extremely smart, extremely physical. He played the game at a whole different level. Was one of the most physical players I ever saw, and he was a defensive back. So I didn't see very many guys in that size of package to be able to be as impactful literally on a game as Ronnie was.
Favorite current 49er?
I think Joe Staley. I've got a lot in common with Joe. We both did a lot of losing before we won.
Besides NFL, what other sports do you watch?
I watch golf. I watch basketball. I watch baseball. That's about it. I mean, especially golf. That's my hidden treat. The thing you get away and be able to, escape things. Who
was your funniest teammate?
I mean, I always loved Fred Dean. And he wasn't always trying to be funny, but he was just naturally an entertaining guy. Yeah, maybe it was Dino. I think all the practical joking guys, of which Montana was one of those, and most of the quarterbacks and whatnot, they kept us entertained too.
Is there a story you're allowed to tell?
Not really. I will tell you one thing: if you're going to be matching practical jokes, don't do it with somebody that makes a stupid amount of money, because they can do things that you can't even think about or afford.
Got you there. What's your advice for any of the upcoming draft picks?
It's all about work. It's not going to be just about, your test scores or anything like that. You can out-prepare. You can outwork people, from the jump. You've got to learn to train that way, to act that way, to always be willing to do that. And if you're willing to do that at all times, you're going to stay at the top of your game as long as you want, because it's really that simple. People always ask, well, how do people play to be 40, 41, 42? They do that constantly. And nowadays it's a little easier because the guys start doing that at a younger age. But that'd be the one thing.
I used the Google machine, and I learned that your father was actually an actor?
Yeah. Yeah, I was born in New York. We lived in Brooklyn, and us and the Dodgers and Giants moved to the West Coast about, 4 years, when I was about 4 years old. And he was in TV. He had a TV series back in the early 60s called Blue Angels. He was predominantly a bad guy. He was the old bad guy in the black hat, or he was the Indian raiding the village or the town, or he was a bad guy as far as a crime guy or something. The first question we always asked him when he came home and said he had got a job was, "Do you die?" So most of the times the answer was yes, but the good roles were when he didn't die till towards the end.
Did he ever say to you, "Randy, what the hell are you doing getting all physical in football? Why don't you go into show business?"
No, he did not. He was a huge sports fan. So when I started being able to do that, he was a happy camper.
Did you ever think about acting after football?
Nah, not really. I like to think a little bit of what I do is kind of like acting, but I saw a side of that business I don't care to get too close to.
Fair point. Favorite Super Bowl win? You had 3 of them.
Yeah, I couldn't name one. It's kind of, I have 3 kids too, so it's like picking your favorite kid. I mean, I will say 81 was the first one. 84 was the best team I ever played on. And the 88 team was my last game. So each one has its own sort of unique place.
And I would assume you'll always pick the Niners dynasty over the Patriots dynasty?
Oh, of course. Of course. We never lost. And we never cheated.
Also true. Also, that is true. Where can fans find you online, and where can we learn more about your podcast?
Well, I think you go to randycross.com. It's also on Twitter and Facebook, and iTunes and Instagram. It's several places, but Instagram, it's R Cross Podcast, and on Twitter, it's Randy Cross FB, or you just go into the old internet and type in randycross.com. You can find it there.
Awesome. Easy enough. randycross.com. Randy, thanks so much for your time.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.